بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا Muhammad وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. All praises due to Allah, and the salutations and greetings and praise we send to His Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and whomsoever follows in his footsteps till the Day of Judgment. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome once again to the show. Purification is half of Iman, because this is where we're talking about the different aspects of purification, which is tahara, the physical and the material aspect of purification, but also there's a interlink with the ritual impurities as well, and purification. And it's important for every Muslim to know these ahkam, these rules, because they have an implication on him on a day-to-day life. And today's show, there are going to be some sections which might not be suitable for the younger viewers, so I leave that to your discretion to whether or not you carry on watching, because this aspect that we're going to talk about later on inshallah is important, although we have to be a little bit more direct because it is part of the Iman. And how many people sometimes they go on practicing their day-to-day life without knowing the rules and certain aspects of their deen, and that actually leads them to fall into mistakes, leads them to fall in errors, leads them to make sometimes big errors which actually can affect their other things, their salah, their purity, and so on. Last week we started speaking about the ethics of relieving oneself, and we mentioned a little bit about that. We ended by saying the dua which a person would say when he leaves the toilet, which is غفرانك اللهم الحمد لله الذي أذهب عني الأذى وعافاني. غفرانك meaning, my Lord, I ask your forgiveness. All praise is due to Allah who has removed from me harm and has cured me. Now the next etiquettes that we mentioned, which is that when a person is relieving himself, i.e. that means he is actually inside the toilet or outside, that he should not face the qibla or turn his back to it, because the Prophet ﷺ, another thing that the Prophet taught was not to face the qibla, because the qibla is an honorable direction. It's a direction which we turn to in salah, and also we turn to in other things, which like our dua. Although dua, you don't have to face the qibla, but it's a noble direction to face. So when you go to the toilet, relieve yourself, so you don't face the qibla and you do not turn your back to the qibla. Now if it is outside, so it's in open space, this ruling becomes haram. So it's haram in outside space to face the qibla or to turn your back to it. And by the qibla here we mean any of the two qiblas, because the first qibla of the Muslims was to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, and the second qibla was to Mecca, Al-Masjid Al-Haram, the sacred house. So either of those two qiblas a person should avoid facing or turning his back to them in open space. If it's inside, so it's inside a toilet which is fixed, and there's walls obviously, or there's partitions, then we don't say it's haram, what we say it's makruh, it's disliked to face the qibla or its direction. And in this case it's better if a person just turns aside slightly if he is able to do so, or she is able to do so. But if they can't, because the toilet is fixed obviously, then it is not haram, but it is a lesser degree of prohibition, which we call makruh or disliked. From the etiquettes as well of going to the toilet as well in open space is that a person does not face the sun or the moon as well. Now there's no real ahadith which says don't face the sun or the moon, but the ulama, or some of them, have deduced this from the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that both the sun and the moon are from His signs. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ اللَّيْلُ وَالنَّهَارُ وَالشَّمْسُ وَالْقَمَرُ. So of His signs is night and day, and the sun and the moon. And also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, whoever magnifies the sha'air, the rituals of Allah, then indeed it is indication of the taqwa, the piety. So because they are signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are obedient creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then a person should avoid facing them or turning his back to them as well in open space. some other basic principles or etiquettes: one shouldn't raise one's clothes until approaching the ground. Again, this is when we're talking about outside, it's to cover one's nakedness as much as possible. One shouldn't urinate on a solid surface, or because again, on a solid surface, the rebound from the urine can actually affect one's clothes. And remember, we're talking here about urine, which is something as najis, it's impure. So if it gets onto your clothes, you have to wash it off. It gets onto your body, you have to wash it off. And you don't want to be engaged in something like that, where you're wasting time, maybe trying to wash the urine or whatever najasa is. So from the beginning, you take the necessary steps to avoid it getting on your clothes. Also, one shouldn't look to the sky. Part of, again, the adabs and the etiquettes of going, don't look to the sky, don't look to your private parts or what exits from you. All these things are from the etiquettes. One should lower one's clothes before getting up, again, to protect one's privacy and nakedness. It is haram and prohibited to urinate in the masjid, obviously, because the masjid is the place of ibadah. We have a hadith or narration that one of the Bedouins, he entered the masjid and urinated because he didn't know, and also because the masjid at that time wasn't like the masajid we have today, where they are carpeted places and so on. The masajid at that time were very much like ground, like outside grounds, because they had either earth, or they had sometimes stones, small pebbles, or whatever. But it's haram to urinate in the masjid, even if it's in a vessel. Also, it is haram to urinate on a grave. It is also disliked, which is makruh, so best one to avoid it, to urinate while standing, because the Prophet ﷺ disliked such an act unless a person has an excuse. And by excuse here, it could be that a person is in a place which is filthy, it's not clean, he's not comfortable sitting, sometimes you have toilet seat, or the area is not safe. A person might be in the middle of the jungle or something, and he's afraid that if he crouches down to relieve himself, he might be bitten by an insect or something. So these kind of exceptions which make common sense for a person to follow. Now, when you're inside the toilet, we said previously that it is haram that a person takes something which has the remembrance of Allah. Similarly, when you are inside the toilet or you are relieving yourself, you should not mention Allah's name on your tongue. So if you do sneeze, and we know that it's recommended when you sneeze to say Alhamdulillah, so in this case you don't say it with your tongue, but you say it with your heart. So you say Alhamdulillah, so it means you're thinking Alhamdulillah as opposed to actually pronouncing it on your tongue. And this goes for the same in the wudu. In wudu, beginning of the wudu, you say Bismillah. So if you are in a place where there's a toilet and you don't want to say Bismillah, again, you say it in your heart. Just remind you that this show, we do receive your questions. If you have any questions to put forward to, there is a telephone number which should appear on your screen. So give us a call, inshallah, we'll be happy to answer any questions you have. The next point, we're just going to talk about some of the ethics of cleaning oneself. So in Islam, basically, the Islamic rules has given us two modes of cleaning. One is using water, which is the fundamental basis, and that's why Muslim houses are always have either they have this sort of like shower type cleaner near the toilet, or they'll have their small, almost like the plant water vessel or a bottle or something, because they use that for the cleansing, because that's the principle. And al-aslu fi at-tahara al-ma', usually water is used. But also that Islam has given us the opportunity, because water is not always available, so you have the opportunity to use something solid to clean the area of where the najasa, the impurity, has exited, whether it's front or back. So it is obligatory, and you must clean yourself. So you can't just unfortunately a lot of people do in the West, especially the males. They would go, they urinate, and that's it. They don't clean themselves, don't wipe themselves after doing so. But in Islam, it's obligatory to clean oneself from everything that is moist, that leaves either of the two exits, with either water, so water washes the area, or with something which is solid. And in the past, they would use something like stones. They may use things like leaves. They may use something like wood. So something which is a solid and has the ability to remove the impurities therein. But on the condition that it must be pure in itself, so we do not use something that's already impure. So for example, if you found an animal's dropping which has become dry, so it becomes like almost like a stone, you can't use that because that in itself is not pure. So you cannot use something which is not pure to clean yourself. Also, you should not use something which is respected, and by respected we mean like a page from a book, or even if it's just a general book, could be a science book, could be a book of knowledge. You don't use that because that's a respected material. And thirdly, that solid must have the ability to remove the actual impurity. So you can't use something which will not remove the impurity, does not have the ability to remove the impurity. Ideally, it's recommended to combine both the water and the solids, and this is in relation to the best cleaning, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the verse, Inna Allah yuhibbu tawabin wa yuhibbu al-mutatahhirin. Allah loves those who do repentance often and those who attempt purity extensively. And this verse was revealed to regards to the people of Quba. When they used to wash themselves and clean themselves, they used to first of all start with using 3 stones, and then they would follow that by using water. In today's world, you have the access to toilet paper, so it's always good to start off by using toilet paper, three pieces of toilet paper to wipe away the impurity, and then follow that with water, so you are taking the reward of combining the two together. If you want to just use one of these options, either the solid or the water, then we say water is better for its better cleansing ability. Now, if you're going to use a stone or you're going to use something solid, then it has certain conditions that come with it. And these are the following conditions. First of all is that the impurity hasn't dried. The impurity, so you've been to the toilet, you've relieved yourself from a stool. Number 2, and at that time it's moist, is left an area of impurity where it has come out. You have to clean it there and then. You can't allow the area to dry and come back later to clean it, because once it's dry, now we say you have to use water. You can't use the solid. Also, the area of the najasa must not have spread over a wider area. So the urine shouldn't have bounced back onto a person's body or onto the side of the thighs, but rather it is in one area, and so that then we can say you can use the stones or the solid only. But if it has moved or it has dried, as we said before, you have to use water. When you are going to use a solid, it must be at least three solids. So you can't just use it once. Even if it removes all the najas, must be at least 3. And if you need, and you keep on using as many as you need until you remove all the impurity. And if you're going to do that, recommended to do it in an odd number, due to the favorability of the odd numbers in the context of the actions like this. It's recommended also to use the left hand, because the Prophet ﷺ used to use his right hand for things which were the cleanliness, so his eating, his drinking, use of different implements, and he used to use the left hand for removing impurities and cleansing oneself. It's recommended to do all of this before wudu. It's recommended that if a person is outside and doesn't have access to water, that once you finish, to wipe your hand with the earth, with the dirt, the mud, and then follow that by washing. Nowadays we have soap as well, so that's extra bonus. And at the end, when a person does cleanse himself and does do that, it's good to say, "O Allah, purify my heart from hypocrisy. Allahumma tahhir qalbi min al-nifaq wa hassin farji min al-fawahish." O Allah, cleanse my heart, purify my heart from hypocrisy, and protect my parts from evil practices. So with that, we complete the section about relieving oneself, going to the toilet. So this is an important part of our deen, understanding how to be clean in when you go to the toilet, the etiquettes of cleaning, going to the toilet, and so on. A lot of them are common sense, but a lot of it is also about having good cleanliness, because bowl, urine is considered an impurity, and also not only is it an impurity, but listen to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He said, تنزهوا من البول فإن عامة عذاب القبر منه. He said, protect yourselves from the urine, and try and relieve yourself of this najasa, because the majority of the punishment in the grave is from the bowl, the urine, that those people who either don't cover themselves, or they don't veil themselves, or they do not protect themselves from this filthy liquid, and by filthy we mean najis. We're going to move on now to the next section, which is the section of ghusl. Ghusl, which is washing. Now, we've spoken about wudu, and we said that wudu, you need wudu to do your salah, to touch the mushaf and carry it. You need wudu to do tawaf and so on. And that is what's known as the minor impurity. So when you do something which nullifies your impurity, the minor one, which we call al-hadath al-asghar, and we mentioned the 4 things a couple of weeks ago, which is anything that exit from the tooth paths, whether it's air, urine or stools, touching a person's private part, whether front or back. We said loss of consciousness or going to sleep, and we said touching a man touching a woman or vice versa. We said all those things will break your wudu, and if they break your wudu, you have to go and do the wudu, which we mentioned the conditions of them, which is the 6 pillars that make up the wudu, and we mentioned the recommended. Now, there are certain things that if they happen, then a person has to do something more than a wudu, which is called ghusl. And ghusl is basically, in very simple terms, is washing all the body with water. So it's like a complete shower, if you like. Complete wash for every part of the body, the external part of the body, to include hair and skin, with the intention. So that's basically what ghusl is. Now, so there's certain things, there's certain acts that if they happen, you have to do the ghusl, you have to have the complete wash. So some things are specific for women, and some things are shared between men and women. So the things that are specific for women include if a woman has her monthly cycle, her menses cycle, so which is something that happens on a monthly basis usually. So when she finishes from this cycle, she has to do a ghusl, a full wash. Similarly, if a woman gives birth, after giving birth, there is also what's known as postnatal bleeding and nifas, sometimes usually lasting for 6 weeks, 40 days, sometimes a little bit longer, sometimes shorter. But anyway, when that blood finishes, then again she has to do ghusl as well. And the third thing is relating to childbirth itself, because although usually a woman gives birth and it's followed by bleeding, sometimes and quite rarely there's no bleeding. So even though she might not have bleeding, but she just gives birth, then we say she have to do ghusl as well. So those 3 things are specific for women. Following them, they have to do ghusl. We're going to talk a little bit about ghusl in a short while. So menses, postnatal bleeding, and childbirth. The other 3 things which are shared between men and women, the first one of which is death. If a person dies, then it becomes obligatory on the community to wash him or her. So he has to have a full wash because he has died in preparation for burial. There is exceptions for some people who die and do not need washing, like a martyr, someone who has been killed in a battle between Muslims and non-Muslims, and he dies in that as a martyr, then he doesn't need to be washed. The fourth thing which necessitates the washing is the exit, or that which occurs with the exit of sexual fluid. And this is known by either the pleasure that is experienced when this happens, or it's known by certain signs that people get to know, whether it's regarding smell or consistency or whatever. So this exiting in itself necessitates that a person has to do ghusl. Now we know before that if somebody urinates, so the exit of urine necessitates wudu. Here the exit of sexual fluid or semen will also necessitate that a person can't just do wudu, he has to do the full ghusl wash. And this usually happens, it might happen when a person's awake, or it might happen when a person is sleeping, which is something known as a wet dream. So if that happens when a person is sleeping and he wakes up or she wakes up and they find that there is liquid, then they have to do the ghusl, they have to do the wash, even though they may not remember anything. And the last thing that necessitates ghusl is sexual intercourse. So a person having sexual intercourse will also result in the necessity of having ghusl for obviously the man and the female. So these 6 things will all necessitate ghusl. We said 3 specifically for women, one which is becomes an obligation on the community, which is death, and then the other things which are related to sexual activity, either the exiting of sexual fluid or intercourse resulting in this, what we call al-hadath al-akbar or al-janaba, major impurity, and necessitates their washing. If a person does have major impurity, then he cannot do the things that he cannot do with minor impurity, so he cannot touch the Quran or carry it, he cannot do salah, he cannot do tawaf. But in addition to that as well, he cannot recite, or she cannot recite the Quran. So even if you don't touch the mushaf, you can't recite the Quran unless you are reciting something which is part of a dua. Maybe you're getting into a car and you say Subhana alladhi sakhara lana hadha wa ma kunna lahu muqrinin. Although that dua is part of the Quran, you're saying it here because it's a dua. You're not saying it because it's a recitation of the Quran. Also, it is prohibited that a person remains in the masjid. So you can't stay in the masjid while you have a major impurity. You can pass by the masjid, as Allah said, وَلَا جُنُوبًا إِلَّا عَابِرِ سَبِيلٍ. So you're just passing by, that's fine. But to actually go and stay in the masjid while you have major impurity is something which is haram. So we're going to take a break, inshallah, now. And once we come back from break, we're just going to go into some aspects of what is washing itself, what is ghusl, so that we can know a little bit about ghusl and the actions relating to ghusl, and then we can have a better idea of this, another type of purification. So stay with us and we'll see you back in a few minutes, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back again to the show, Purification, half of Iman. And we had spoken just before the break about ghusl, what makes the necessity of ghusl. Now we're just going to talk about some of the obligations of what is ghusl. And basically ghusl just has 2 main conditions or 2 main obligations. The first obligation is intention. So you must have the intention of removing the najasa. And secondly, it is to wash, to make the water reach all parts of the body. So all the skin and all the roots or the hairs throughout the body. So that is the basic elements of ghusl. Okay, we have a phone call, so we'll just take the call, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Yes, hi, I have a question.
Yes.
Basically, my mum had cancer, and you said cleaning for death, right?
Your mum has had?
Cancer.
Okay.
Looked a bit, disorientated in words. In terms of cleaning,
right.
What do you mean by the community would pitch in and clean?
So your mother has had cancer. Sorry,
Yeah, and she passed away.
okay, she's passed away. So now that she has passed away, may Allah have mercy on her, it becomes a necessity on you or the community to wash the body. So washing the body in preparation for burial. So it is.
Okay.
So that's what we mean. It becomes obligatory because any person that dies or any Muslim that dies, we have to wash him or her, and then we have to wrap them up in the clothes of burial in preparation for burial. But obviously, because they're dead, they can't do that. It becomes an obligatory on the society, the community, to do that on their behalf. And we can ensure. Yes.
You don't mean like the whole of like the whole family to one person to kind of do it for them.
No, not the whole body. Either, I mean, somebody, as much people as needed. So usually 1, 2 or 3 people, which can be there to help. Not all the family needs to do it, but the close relatives, they have the responsibility of to make sure that is being done.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome. And this thing about washing the dead person, obviously, and inshallah, we're going to talk a little bit about washing a person, washing himself or herself, and then maybe inshallah we'll talk about washing a dead person as well, because it obviously needs a little bit of different practices. So we said that the main pillars, conditions of ghusl is the intention and washing, making sure the water reaches every part of the body and the roots of the hair. So that's the basic thing. Now, when we look at it, when we look at more of a direct way of doing it, what's the best way of doing washing? Well, the best way of doing washing is to first of all to make sure that there's no impurity on your body. So to remove that physically, make sure either washing it with water or whatever, you might have a little bit of impurity anywhere in the body, remove that. Obviously, if there's anything preventing water reaching the body, whether it's like paint or nail varnish or whatever that prevents water reaching, again, you have to remove that first. You make the intention that you're going to do ghusl, so you're not just having a shower, but here you're actually wanting to make the intention of removing the major impurity. So that removal of the major impurity has to be an intention that you have there. You say Bismillah, similar to wudu, and then you start by doing wudu. So it's recommended that the first things that you do is do wudu. So the normal acts of wudu, washing the mouth, the nose, the face, do that first. Then once you've done the wudu, you get the water and you get the wet water and you get it into your hair to make sure, sort of to get the water right into the bottoms of the hair. Then pour the water over the right side of the body 3 times. Then follow that by pouring it over the left side of the body 3 times, all accompanying this with, rubbing, moving your hand over the areas of the body, getting into the areas where there might be, the water is difficult to get in. There's sometimes folds in your body. I mean, sometimes if, under the armpits, behind the ears, there's some areas which are, the water doesn't usually come to. So again, making sure that you get to those areas as well, to rub every time, and so on. So all of this is all in aid to make sure that the water reaches every part of the body. It must reach all the roots of the hairs, and so on. Now, for a woman who has lots of long hair and her hair might be tied up, she doesn't have to untie all her hair if she doesn't want to. It's a bit of a trick, or whatever. But the main thing is that the water must reach all the hair. So if without untying the hair, she can pour the water and so on, but as long as it reaches the scalp. If it doesn't reach it without untying the hair, then she has to untie the hair. So that's basically the simple, the simple basic things of how to do the washing. But you don't have to do it like that. You don't have, those are the recommended things to do. These 3, and also it's recommended to do it 3 times. It's recommended to face the qibla if you can, and also things like a siwak, to brush the teeth or to wash one's mouth with a toothbrush. All these things are recommended as part of the whole washing process. Now, there are some things which are disliked when you're doing ghusl. So it's disliked, first of all, to be extravagant with water, always. So, don't waste water. Secondly, it is disliked to wash in stagnant water. So, something like a small pond or a small pool of water, and you just go there and do the wash. Because the najasa, the impurity reflects, is going to be washed off you and back into that pool. It's disliked to do it more than 3 times, because again, the 3 times is the sunnah, is what the Prophet, you could do it once, twice or 3 times. Don't do it more. Now in ghusl, you don't have to wash the mouth or inside the nose. It's recommended, because for our ghusl, you only have to wash the external parts. And the external parts, if you close your mouth like this, then whatever is showing when you close your mouth is considered external. Similarly with your nose, if your nose is closed, everything that is still shown, that is considered external. Everything that's not shown is considered internal. So you just have a duty of washing what's external and not what is internal. It is disliked for a person with this major impurity. It's disliked for him or her to eat, drink, sleep before washing one's private parts and making wudu as much as possible, as possible. So for example, if you had major impurity following one of those things that you have done, that we've mentioned, and you need to do ghusl, you need to do the full wash, what we say is it's better not to eat or drink or to go to sleep without, at the very minimum, to wash your private parts and to do wudu. So that's how the washing is for a person. If you're going to be washing a dead person, then it's following the similar things, but we just have extra things to do. First of all, when you lay the dead person down, sometimes the dead person might have some remnants of waste inside him or her. So what they do is, obviously you cover the lower parts, which is the private parts of that person, because you shouldn't be looking at the private parts of a person, whether they are alive or dead, for the protection. They are private by nature. So you would wrap the lower part with a towel or a cloth. Then what they do is someone would sort of press the stomach, the abdomen, trying to encourage any waste material to come down. And sometimes what they do is they would actually pull the legs up, the knees up, and push to see if anything would come out, because here you're trying just to get rid of any excrement that might be there. A person having some sort of bag on his hand or cloth or whatever can then clean that area, similar to how one would clean his child or her child. That is then done to make sure there's no excrement. Then you follow the normal processes of the same ghusl. So you start by doing the wudu for the dead person, following the areas of wudu. Then you start by washing the right side, wash the left side, making sure that the water has reached all the areas of the body. Avoid cutting the dead person's nails, avoid cutting their hair, because all of these things are a part of the dead person. They should not be removed. They should just be buried with him or her. And also it is recommended to use some musk and to place the musk in the areas of where a person would normally pray. So on his forehead, the hands, or palms, the hands, and on the knees and toes, knees and the inner part of the toes or feet. So that's basically with regards to ghusl and purification. So now we've spoken about wudu, which is the minor, the removal or the uplifting of the minor impurity. We've spoken about ghusl, which is the removal of the major impurity. Now we're going to talk about some impurities. So we have things which are called najis. They are impurities, and by impurities means that if you have a glass of water which is pure, you can use it for your washing, you can use it for wudu, for your ghusl, and so on. If something falls into it from the categories that we're going to mention and it's impure, then all of this becomes unusable. I can't use it for my ghusl, for my wudu, and so on, or to remove something najis. So I can't use that. You can go and put it on the grass or something, or use it for a plant, but you cannot use it for removing impurity, whether it is actual impurity or physical impurity. So that's why we need to know what the impurities are. Secondly, if an impurity falls on our clothes, even if it's a small bit, we have to remove that impurity. So we need to know what the impurities are so that we remove them from our clothes or our body. Because when we do salah, our body should have no impurity, our clothes should have no impurity, and the place where we pray should not have any impurity. So what are the impurities? First of all, impurities include anything which is alcoholic. So wine, and by alcoholic we mean something which is fermented alcohol. Fermented alcohol which is made for drinking. Khamr is najis, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَّهَا رِجْسٌ فَإِنَّهُ رِجْسٌ. It's rijs, which is another word for najis. So it includes wine, beer, spirits, all these different types of alcoholic drinks, whiskey, gin, cider, all these things. Whatever they are najis. They fall onto your clothes, you have to wash it off. They're on your body, you have to wash it off. But it has to be fermented alcohol. So we're not talking about alcoholic rubs, which some people say, sometimes you have this alcoholic soap, which is in the hospitals and things. Alcohol, you wipe your hands with it to disinfect your hands, and then it goes. That is manufactured alcohol, and that's different from fermented alcohol. And there's a different opinion amongst the scholars. But the opinion that I follow is that the manufactured alcohol is not najis, it's the fermented alcohol, the alcohol that comes through from grapes, from wheat, from barley, and all those kind of foods. Secondly, dog. The dog is completely najis. So all the body of the dog, all the fluids that come from the dog, his saliva especially, is najis. So and we have a very sort of severe hadith, a very strict hadith that, if the cleanliness of the container of any one of you, when the dog licks in it, is to wash it 7 times. So that shows us how the dog is quite najis, 7 times. We'll talk about that later on, inshallah. The next category of najis is a pig. So again, the pig and all of its body is najis. Following that is obviously their offspring, which goes without saying. The dead animal is najis. So a chicken dies naturally or is beaten up. By dead animal we mean any animal that's not slaughtered. When you slaughter it, it becomes halal, becomes clean. But when it dies, either by strangling it, or it dies naturally, or it's thrown on somebody runs it over, throws it on the wall, hits it to death, whatever, any way that it's not slaughtered becomes a dead animal. When it's dead, it's najis, except the human. So the human does not become najis when he dies, except aquatic life. So things like fish, when they die, they don't become najis, and things like locusts. So those 3 things are exceptions to dead animals. But apart from that, all dead animals are najis. And that's why we have a general rule here, which is good to note this rule. All dead animals are najis except fish and locusts, and obviously humans. All living animals are tahir, are pure, except dogs and swines or pigs. So those are 2 rules which is easy to remember. So all other animals are tahir. Foxes, wolves, lions, llamas, ostriches, every other animal, sheep, everything is tahir. And by tahir we mean them as their bodies, their hair, etc. All that is tahir except the dog and the pig. Also, the following is najis: blood, pus, vomit, stools, excrement, urine, pre-ejaculation fluid, which is called madhi, wadi, changed liquid from a sleeping person's mouth. And by changed liquid means something that is similar to vomit. Somebody might vomit. Something that comes out of the stomach is najis. Saliva is not najis, but contents of the stomach becomes najis. So that's why we said vomit is najis. The semen of the dog, swine, the pig and their offspring, milk of those whose meat isn't consumed except the human. So for example, we don't eat lions, we don't eat donkeys, we don't eat elephants, so their milk is considered najis as well for us. the embryo and the moisture from the private parts are clean. So if a woman has a miscarriage, for example, and sometimes there's an embryo, a small embryo, a small baby, which is usually lots of blood and things, that is, the embryo itself is not najis, because this is a person, this is a human. The blood around it is najis. So that embryo can be cleaned and buried. The part which is cut off from an animal is like the dead. If you have a sheep, a living sheep, and you cut its tail off, or you cut its leg off, and the animal is still alive, that leg is najis. You cannot eat it, and it's najis as well, it's impure. So anything that comes of an animal is like it's dead, except the hair of an edible animal, its feathers and wools, they are pure. So if you remove the hair of an edible animal, a sheep, camel, goat, cow, the hair or the feathers or the wool, that is not najis. The donkey you can't eat, it's not an edible animal. So the hair of the donkey is najis, because it's considered part of the donkey that's come off the donkey. The hair of the cat is najis as well, because it's a hair coming off an animal which is not edible. So that's an important point to pay attention to. And also what we have to understand when we're talking about najis things is that how does najasa, how does impurity transmit? Say there is say this was alcohol. We said alcohol is najis, and that alcohol was spilt on this table, and I touched that alcohol with my hand. So my hand now has transmitted, the najis has transmitted to my hand. I have to wash my hand to get the najis. But say the alcohol dried, it became a dry area, and my hand is dry, and I touched it. So dry onto dry, we say that my hand has not become najis, because there is no liquid as a medium to transmit the najasa. So dry to dry doesn't transmit the najasa. One of them has to be, if my hand was wet and I touched it, it becomes najis, or the najasa is wet, becomes najis. Inshallah, we'll talk about that later on in a different lesson. Time has caught up with us today. Jazakumullah khair for listening, and we hope to be with you soon in the next episode of Purification is Half of Iman. Be with us. I'm Umar Al-Hamdoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.